Hello, everybody. Ted Huntington here with another author interview sponsored by Women's Rights Publishing and Author Services. Today, I'm chatting with the New Orleans native, Chicago area resident, and multi-talented DM Needom. Please like and follow these videos on YouTube, as I say for all of our interviews. Hello, Donna.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Doing very good.
So you started your writing journey, writing stories when you were in high school. Take us on that journey from high school to your first published novel.
That's about a 30-year journey, to be honest.
We have time. We have time.
I started out, basically what happened was I had transferred high schools in the beginning of my junior year. The summer between sophomore and junior year, my mom was like, we're moving from New Orleans to Shreveport, which is total culture shock. I mean, not so much now, but back then it was very much the Bible Belt, and it was just very surreal compared to New Orleans, because New Orleans was very much the party city, and it still is. So I didn't fit in exactly, especially because I hadn't been at school with boys for like 2 years at this point. I was in an all-girl Catholic school in New Orleans. So yes, I was Sandra D. Lack of a better way to put it, I would, if you were going to pick the character in Grace for me, that would have been it. My friends used to joke that Adam Ant's goody two shoes was me. That being said, I have done some things that, I did get out of that. But anyway, that's that. Let me not digress here.
That's a whole other interview.
That's right. So I met a couple friends, and one of them was writing fan fiction about a band. Of course, we didn't call it fan fiction back then. It really didn't have a name. We were just writing. And so she was writing the story, and she's like, oh, I'll put you in. And I'm like, okay. So she did. And I'm like, you know what? I can do this. Yeah, I'll do my own. So I started, and I put her in my story and everything. I still have her story, and we actually videotaped her story, except she's not in the videotape. It was me and another group of friends. So which is more comedy gold than anything. But anyway, I still have my original story. I will never publish it. It will never be seen. It is atrocious. It is the worst thing in the world. That being said, so I wrote this fan fiction, and it was fun. It was amusing, and I enjoyed it. And it was a nice escape from being picked on at school and not fitting in and all that awkward stuff my junior and senior year. So it was a nice escape, which then brings us to Live Aid, as you and I had talked about off camera. I went to Live Aid. I met another person that won a trip, because I had won a trip. And one of the other winners, her and I became roommates, and we started writing another story about another band. And it was more fan fiction. So she stopped writing, I kept writing. Then I took a couple of years off before I went to college, and then I met another person, and we started messing around, and we started writing a story, and she quit writing and I kept writing. And then I changed what her and I had written. I made it the way I wanted it. I started writing my own piece, and I kept dabbling with it. I made it it wasn't so much fan fiction at that point. The characters had taken on their own life. And so around 2010, I belonged to a writing group called, it was through Key Publications, and it was the Vicious Writers Group. And so they had a contest to write a short story, and they had different categories. And yes, that's Vicious Bites. I did actually do it. I sat down and I finally completed something, because my husband used to joke that he would die before I actually finished publishing anything. But anyway, that's a topic for a little bit later.
Well, maybe it was encouraging to you. He knew that would inspire you.
It was, but it was a running joke in a way. So he wrote a piece of poetry that's in there, and I ended up sitting down and writing a short story. I sat down one afternoon. I'm like, I'm going to write a short story, and I'm going to win this contest. So I ended up writing a short story called Immortal Love, and I won the Vicious Seduction contest. It was about, it's a little racy. It opens up with the victim being on a St. James cross. And she's a dominatrix. What better cover for a vampire than being a dominatrix?
Perfect.
She if he doesn't have anybody at home and he's a loner, well, nobody's going to mind if he disappears. So
I could see that winning a contest.
So that was the start. And I mean, it kind of had other little twists and turns in it. And then I wanted to explore the avenue of what would happen if you had you were chronically ill and in severe pain all the time, and someone offered you to become a vampire. Would you do it? So I dabbled in this other story. My allergies are acting up, so I'm sorry. I dabbled in this other story. It didn't turn out exactly the way I wanted it, but it still made it into the book. So I have 2 stories in that book. It's out of pub print now, and I will end up taking the immortal love story and putting it into my world that we're getting to as far as my writing journey. So fast forward, I'm still dabbling. My husband gets put on dialysis, and I'm stuck at Barnes and Noble for roughly 4.5 to 5 hours, 3 times a week. Now, Barnes is fun, and yeah, I could have gone anywhere, but we lived pretty far away from where the dialysis clinic was. It was 20 something miles each way, and I really didn't feel like driving back and forth. So I would go to Barnes, and I had my laptop, and I started writing this tale of this rocker who was one of my side characters from my original story that I've been working on for 30 years. And I did it as a marketing ploy. It was going to be just a straight up marketing ploy. It was going to be his tale. So I started off as a blog, and I'm writing it as a journal, and he's very well drug addicted. He's out of control, and he's writing these stories. And I start getting rehab clinics liking my post and following me. And I'm thinking to myself, if these people actually think it's real and they're following it, maybe there's something here. So I said, you know what? I'm going to turn it into a book. So the book changed a little bit before it finally got published, but it's his journey.
They always do, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I had some people read it and they're like, it's really dark. You need to redeem him. Otherwise, you're not going to find an audience. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of redeem him at the end, kind of, but not totally. It ended up starting a whole series. So now I have this world. So the book that I was talking about is this one, which is My Days with the Dark Muse. And you meet, and this book will come into play because you end up meeting characters from this that are in this book in my next book. That'll be coming out in November. So after that, the reason that got published though, was because from sitting at Barnes and Noble, they were closing that location. And one of my friends that I ended up knowing from being there for a couple of years says to me that she's going to have one more last new writer's night. And I'm like, I want to be part of that. So in order to get to be part of that, you have to publish. I did what every new writer should not do. I did not have it professionally edited. I created the cover. In fact, I have a copy of it up there behind me. In fact, I have several copies of it. I went ahead and got it printed. I did my copyright. So I did that smart, but it wasn't professionally edited. I made the cover. It was pretty bad. And I put it out there. And as soon as I released it on Amazon, I actually had somebody pick it up. I didn't put it on Amazon at first. I put it on Apple and stuff. She went and looked up her Apple ID to find it. And then she decided, okay, she was going to get it because she liked the premise of the book, that this drugged out rock star, she wanted to read about it. And she read it in one day, and she told me how great of a book it was and how she just loved it and couldn't wait to read more. And I was like, okay. So that was the start of that. So that was May of 2019.
But, if I could interject here.
Go ahead.
Everybody says to become a writer, just write, just sit down and write and, educate yourself and everything. But it seems like almost unknowingly you were educating yourself and you were teaching yourself how to become a real full-time author, published author by, starting just doing what you like to do, writing fan fiction and writing short stories. And it just kind of evolved where you learned how to do character arcs and everything without like going, I'm going to educate myself and I'm going to learn to become a writer. You just sat down and wrote and did it.
Yeah. I mean, my husband, because I used to joke around with my husband, I'm like, I should go to school for this. And he's like, no. I took one novel writing class and the teacher told me, she's like, no one should write. She tells the whole class that. She's like, no one should write a duet, basically. If you're starting your first book, it should not be a duet. It should be one person, one point of view. At this point, we're going back to the 30-year journal. I was writing 2 POVs. So after class, I walked up to her and I said, can I ask you a favor? She's like, what? I said, this is my story. I've written in 2 points, points of view. Can you take a look at it? She's like, sure. The next week I come back, she goes, okay, what I said does not apply to you. I'm like, okay. And she was published. She had several books published. I'm like, all right. So that kind of gave me the confidence that, okay, I can do this. But yeah, my big thing, I am not, when it comes to grammar and the technical end of writing, that is not my forte. And I will openly admit it. I have an editor for that. I'm a storyteller, and that's the way I look at it. I'm a storyteller. I may not get the other stuff perfect, but I do tell a story. Which, if you want,
that's the important thing. But that's the important thing.
Yeah. Well, and so after I released Days, there was a publishing house that was actually offering a contest for a contract, and it was for a romance book, and the only thing that was required was a happily ever after. And I'm like, okay, so mind you, this is the end of July, and it took me 2 years to write my Days with the Dark Muse, and it's taken me 30 years to try to write a book. Okay, so now I'm going to give myself a little, the contest ends, I think, like September 5th. So I'm giving myself a little over maybe 6 weeks to write this book.
Right, and then proofread it. And
yeah. So I just go ahead and I hit the ground running. I start writing something. I was going to expand Immortal Love, and I'm like, no. I go and sit down, and Barnes closes in the middle of this. So I end up at another coffee shop, and I'm writing. And then I finally just said, you know what, I'll just drop you off and come home. But I ended up finishing it. And I'm all set. I'm getting ready to send the contract in, and there's this line in the contract, and I'm sure it's boilerplate, but it made me step back, and I may have shot myself in the foot, but it was like, the line was something along the lines of, if we happen to write a book, put out a book that's similar to yours, you can't sue us, in layman's terms. And
so it sounds like they were saying we can steal your story.
Basically, that's the way I took it. And so at that moment I said, you know what, screw that. I'm going to keep my book. I'm going to bring Nigel, who's a guy from Days, into this book. I ended up writing, there's one of my friends who's actually one of my beta readers, and she helps me sometimes when I can't need to expand an idea or whatever. She'll talk to me and we'll work through it. But I wrote a birthday scene in this book, and she's like, that is my favorite scene. It was a little kid's birthday, something that the guy does for this kid. And she's like, that is my favorite scene. And I've had people tell me, they're like, when I sit there and I openly admit that scene wasn't part of the book, or something else wasn't part of the book, they're like, I can't tell that. Everything is flawless. And the thing about that is, I write that way. I don't write linear. I will write one scene way over here and then write another scene way over here. And for me, like right now, I'm working on, as I said, this is a saga. I have sat down, I'm working on a book that's set in 1984, but then there's a scene that came to mind that it's set in 1996 that I went and wrote.
Well, that's interesting. It's kind of episodic. So then you can figure out where you want to place it in the story.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, for me, I don't write like most people. I know a lot of people write linear, and I have outlines and I try to follow outlines, but it's all moving.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, I'm glad you took us on your writing journey, your yellow brick road of writing. In the intro, I said you're multi-talented. Writing is far from your only skill. You're a musician, a former model. You did some acting. So tell the viewers about these interesting facets of your career.
Musician, I wanted to be a bass player in a band, and that's kind of where the writing comes from when you think about it, because my world that I'm creating deals with the entertainment industry. And this is my cat, Chloe.
Hi, Chloe.
It deals with the entertainment industry. So all those experiences, and that's what I look at. Life has kind of taught me and given me these opportunities. So when I was in high school, I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be a bass player in a band, and her tail is tickling me. Sorry.
Her tail is in a very precarious position.
Anyway, so I wanted to be in a band, and it was everything. And that's kind of one of the reasons why when I met my first roommate after Live Aid, she wanted to be in a band too. So we formed a band, and that didn't really go anywhere. And then I met a guy, and I was a bass player, and we did a talent show or two, and we did Beatles covers. So I got to be in a band there, and then I was a backup singer for another band in Dallas, and that didn't last very long. But so that was kind of the fun thing there. And then I had a friend, one of my other roommates was in a band all the time, and I would travel around with them. I went they went to WGN to do a live radio show at like midnight one Friday night, and so I was there and that part. And then I followed some bands around, so I kind of got to see that life and what it's like, and it's been an interesting ride. Modeling, while I got scouted to go over to Dallas to do modeling, I waited a year after I was scouted, and I was a lot skinnier than I am now. I went over there, and they told me, oh, well, you need to lose about 10 pounds. The ethnic look is in, you're more of a glamour girl. So, and I'm like, okay, instead of saying, yeah, they're like, you can do catalog work. And instead of saying, oh yeah, let me do that, I passed. But I did do TV modeling in Shreveport for a home shopping channel, and I modeled lingerie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
So yeah, there is that video somewhere, but I own a copy, but I'll never air that. But and let's see, so that was modeling and acting. Well, I did work on a TV show called The Wacky World of Kitchen Erotica. Originally, I was an actress, which I played several different roles because the show kept transforming into different things with different producers and different directors. And lastly, when we finally finished 6 episodes, I was working as a line producer, but my roles on that show ended up being a drunk porn star or ex-porn star who was dating one of the characters. There was also the British opera singer who got a pie in her face. There was the woman who talked to her boobs, and then I was fully clothed, by the way, and the old woman bodyguard. So that was kind of diverse. But then the legit work that I actually did, I worked on The Negotiator as an extra. I worked on Since You've Been Gone, which was pretty cool because it was a featured extra role. And then my best friend's wedding, I'm a blur, but Julia Roberts got to run right past me. So that was kind of cool.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So how did all these really cool experiences relate to your books?
Well, like a prime example, one of my friends went a trip to go see Duran Duran in concert in Texas, and we had limousine to and from the show. And it's not nice what I did. I admit that. But at the time it felt hell of a good. And so we went to the show, and we get the limo, and we're in the limo coming back, and we're on the interstate, and there's girls following the limo thinking that, we're the band. And so I rolled down the window a little bit, and I have my bracelets on. Their bass player at the time, John Taylor, used to wear bracelets a lot. Excuse me. And I had a glass in my hand from the bar, and I held it out the window, and the girls are going crazy, and they're still following us. And mind you, this is a 45-minute car trip. And so we get to the hotel, and they jump out of their car, and the limo driver, she was very nice. She says, do you want me to sit here for a minute or two? I'm like, sure, that's fine. And mind you, my friend's in the car as well. And these girls jump out of the car, and they're holding their papers, and they're all excited because they're going to meet the band. And then we got out.
Well, you're this badass bass player.
Yeah, well, they weren't
that band.
Yeah, they weren't pleased, but I mean, things like that, and just hanging out with rock stars and hanging out in that industry, in the music industry, and sitting in a studio with other musicians and watching them create. And I even was a disc jockey at one point in my career, so that all that fodder comes into play, because you can take all those little pieces and make this world happen.
That's what I was going to say. It does make great fodder for
Yeah.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, in setting my stories in the 1980s and the 90s, and not saying that I'm not going to end up moving into the 2000s, but you grow from like 80, in 84, you didn't have text messaging. You didn't have all the technology we had. You still had the paparazzi, but it wasn't the instantaneous thing of the paparazzi. So you still had the scandal rags, but it was a different thing. So as my stories go forward, those things will come into play and be more incorporating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I also want to get into your podcasts. You do host a very popular podcast. How did that come about? And what are your podcasts focus on?
The interesting thing is, okay, so my book world is the Better to Burnout world. And last year, in December, this gentleman was doing a podcast all of 2020. He started in January, and he started a podcast to talk to one person a day about their fear. And he found me and he's like, "You want to talk?" And I'm like, "Sure." And my fear was about losing my husband. Well, at that time, because I lost my husband last June, or not last, well, June of 2020. I lost him.
Sorry.
And it's okay. And so when I met him, one of the things I told him was it was better to love him and lose him than never to love him at all, because we were friends for like a year or so. And then he's telling me, he didn't want to date, even though he liked me, he didn't want to date because he was sick. And we had 16 years together. So it wasn't that this was an instantaneous thing. So my big thing for my fear was the losing him, that it was, and we explored the question of, was it better to love him and lose him than never to have loved him at all? So as I was sitting there after I did my interview, a couple months later, I was still sitting there and I was thinking, everybody's got a better to moment. I Googled better to, and sure enough, there's pages upon pages, and some are really serious and some are really stupid. Like, it's better to be single and fool around than get married. And, there's just this whole expanse of that. So I said, well, if I do a podcast, because people have told me, because of my background, my radio background, to do a podcast. And I was like, well, why not do it better too? And so, excuse me. And so I got into the podcast doing the Better Too. And what it basically does is I find my guests come to me, or I find my guests, and we explore their Better Too moment. It can be something as serious as drug addiction, alcoholism. It can be something as lighthearted as one gentleman I interviewed, Reese Ulrich. He is an Australian model who almost walked away from Make Me a Supermodel. And I know that seems trivial, but the fact is he didn't want to do it. His wife, or his girlfriend at the time, who's now his wife, and his mom kept saying, "You should do this." It was the first season, and he's like, "Nah." He snuck to do it, and then he was in line and he was going to go surfing, and he's like, "I'd really rather go surfing." So he was getting out of line, and one of the producers stopped him. So he did his walk and he tripped, and they're like, "Thanks." So he's doing an exit interview, and they said, "Come on back in." He ended up winning the whole thing.
Wow.
So a Better To moment. I mean, was it better to have stayed and skipped the surfing trip? I mean, it changed his life. So it can be something as serious as serious as, like I said, addiction, or even depression, or something as lighthearted as that. But it's still life-changing. And then I sat down, I guess it was about 5 or 6 episodes in, and I'm like, do you realize you branded yourself without even trying? Because you have the Better To podcast and the Better To Burnout series. So the podcast, because I lost my husband, it has been something that's beneficial for me, because especially during COVID, it has allowed me to communicate with people. And even though as a writer, you do that, and that's the one thing I want to connect emotionally with people with my writing, I want to, with the podcast, I'm allowed to connect with people on a different level. And I've been told by guests that it's a safe space. So that to me is one of the most rewarding things, is hearing that that's a safe space that I've given people.
So where can everybody find your podcast?
It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Anchor. It's on most of the podcast channels, and it's the Better To ... podcast with DM Needom. And if it's also, there's a link on my site. So
what are you working on now for your writing?
For my writing, I am currently working on the next book in the series, and it's called Remember Who's Your Man. It's I have to actually divide it into 2 books. So it's a part 1, part 2 type thing. And it ties into, there's characters from both my books. Nigel Hartigan who is in Days, and his wife, Ava Richards, are in the next book. And Russell Langford, Mason Langford from Worth Waiting For are also in it. But what I've done, because both my books basically are set in the 1990s, now we're going back in time. So
Very
for some
cool.
people who have read Love is Worth Waiting For, they're going to know what happens to Mason. And I was told that they really wanted more from Mason. So now Mason gets a little bit more of a life.
Very cool. Very cool. So give me one. I ask almost every author. Give me your best book marketing tip.
You know, it's funny you mention it, because right before I got on with you, there was something on Instagram talking about the fact that the only way to make Instagram work is if you have people that are commenting and liking on your posts. Otherwise, they get buried. So I would say that is the best thing. If you can get your content, if you can make your followers, and I would say that's most platforms now, if you can make followers like and respond to your your content, then they're gonna be reaching out to you. They're gonna end up promoting you more.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, get those followers, get them engaged in
Exactly.
what you're posting. I'm going to give you 60 seconds for towards the end here to do a sales pitch. Promote your books, promote your whatever you want to promote.
I'll promote my books. And the reason I'm going to promote my books is the fact is the book I'm writing right now is Remember Who's Your Man, and my cat is biting me. Sorry. Remember Who's Your Man. And the fact of the matter is it's a journey. It's the start of Ava's journey. Ava is 18 years old, but she will evolve into a strong woman. And that's one thing that I think most people don't realize, that women aren't born strong. They have to grow strong. And my books are all realistic. I write realistic fiction. And if you enjoy really a little bit of reality, then pick up my books.
No, that's great. Well, obviously your cat wants more of your attention now, so I'll let you give your cat some attention. It's really been a pleasure, Donna. I've appreciated the time.
No worries. It's been fun.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.